determine appropriate next steps. In the back.
Marcin Wrona, TV and Warner Bros. Discovery from Poland. You repeated a few times that you're working with the Polish government on this issue. Who are you talking with? At what level, if you don't want to give any specific names? And also, if this is confirmed, should this trigger an immediate increase of the numbers of U.S. Boots on the ground in Poland, maybe sending additional Patriot batteries, fortifying eastern flank?
I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, but again, I do not want to get ahead of hypotheticals or get into a tit for tat of potential actions. What I can say is that we will determine what happened and we will determine what appropriate next steps to take. We are engaging directly with our partners in the Polish government. I don't have specifics to offer in terms of who and at what level. But like I said, Poland is an important partner, an important NATO ally, and so we are continuing to work through these process and engage on them.
A follow-up: will Secretary Blinken want to talk to Minister Rao? Is a contact at this level possible?
I don't have any calls to preview or read out yet, for that matter. I'm just not going to get ahead of that process in the back.
So not getting into hypotheticals, but President Biden did say. And Secretary Blinken also have repeatedly said that, U.S. is gonna defend every inch of NATO territory. So can you just repeat it today, as in principle? And do you have any reaction to just the overall attack, the barrage from Russia today? It's been reported that it's the largest one so far, largest missile attack. Do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, I think I spoke to this a little bit in responding to Alex's question. But first, to your first question, of course, we stand by NATO and our NATO allies and partners. This administration views NATO as one of the most important transatlantic defensive alliances out there. But again, I'm not going to get ahead of hypotheticals as we continue to work through this process and determine what's happened and determine appropriate next steps. On the barrage of strikes that we saw take place in Kyiv, as I said, while President Zelensky spoke at the G20 about a path to a just peace and for ending this war, what we saw was Russia unleash a barrage of attacks that have killed civilians and destroyed critical infrastructure. And it is no surprise that after the Ukrainian liberation of Kherson, that Russia has gone down the path of attempting yet again to plunge Ukrainian civilians into darkness. But what the United States is going to do is going to continue to stand by the government and the people of Ukraine, and our commitment to our Ukrainian partners is unwavering. Anything else?
One last question on this. I know you don't want to get ahead of this, but Russia's already trying to spin the situation here with the defense minister putting out a short statement saying that the reports of Russian missiles landing in Poland are, quote, a deliberate provocation aimed to escalate the situation. Do you have a response to what they're saying about this? Right
well, the United States is certainly not trying to escalate or incite the situation at all. And like I said, we have seen these same reports that you all have, and we are working with the Polish government to gather more information. And we are not at a point where we can confirm some of these reports that we're seeing. And that's why I'm telling you that we will determine what exactly has transpired, and we will determine appropriate next steps as well. Let's go. Still on the region, or are we moving away?
On this topic, please.
Let me do one more, and then I'll come back to you. And then we're going to work through them, Alex.
In response to Putin's terrorist attacks, you just mentioned over 100 missiles have been, stuck in Kiev and around. Is it time for the department to revisit its decision on Russia's percentage of information? And if not now, then when?
Alex, we have spoken about this quite regularly, and our answer continues to be the same, and that is that we have a number of tools in our tool belt to hold the Russian Federation accountable and to support our Ukrainian partners. We have done that through sanctions and export controls on Russia. We have done that through security assistance and humanitarian assistance to our Ukrainian partners. And we continue to assess that that a specific state sponsor of terror designation would largely be a redundancy to the many lines of efforts that the United States has already undertaken. Additionally, as I said to you about this a couple of weeks ago, it's been raised to us that a number of humanitarian organizations operating in the region, it would make their work more difficult if a specific state sponsor of terror designation were to take place. But I will remind you that we have continued to do everything possible to support our Ukrainian partners, including additional drawdowns earlier this month, as well as USAI packages. And we've continued to take steps to support our Ukrainian partners and to bolster their efforts to defend their sovereignty and defend their territorial integrity. I will also add that our sanctions and export controls are having a direct impact on the Russian economy and the Russian Federation. And so we will continue pursuing these lines of efforts as well.
And let's not forget Moldova as well. Moldova also got impacted today.
I'm going to work the room. We've got a lot of questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. Could you confirm that Secretary Blinken is going to visit China early next year, and what is going to be his mission?
So in the follow-up of President Biden's bilateral meeting with President Xi, it was determined that Secretary Blinken will travel to China at some point, and currently we are working diligently with our counterparts in the PRC to schedule a visit, which is tentatively planned for early next year, but
There, our briefing from the State Department moved on there to the issue of the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visiting China later in the year. But as you heard, there are a lot of questions about these reports of a missile strike on a small village in Poland on the border with Ukraine that has reportedly killed 2 people. And the spokesperson there saying that at times he sounded like a broken record, that they are trying to establish the full facts of what happened, and then we'll assess the appropriate next steps. But made very clear that the United States is unwavering in its support of Ukraine, which has been attacked again today by Russia, missiles striking right across the country, not just those locations on the front line. Major cities, the capital Kiev, Lviv, Kharkiv, all attacked by missiles today. The spokesperson there saying they see that, the United States sees that as a direct response to the G20 meeting addressed by President Zelensky of Ukraine. Well, let's get the latest from our correspondent, Mark Stone there. And Mark, more or less summed up there the State Department response. I mean, this is clearly reverberating around Washington, reverberating around NATO capitals, reverberating around the G20 as well. But first and foremost is to establish the facts.
Yes, it was always the big fear that either intentionally or by accident a Russian missile would stray into NATO territory, and then what would the NATO response be? I think that was an attempt that we just saw over the past 10 minutes by a State Department spokesman to tread water while his superiors work out precisely what happened and work out what the response will be. Part of the problem, I think, from an American perspective, is that the US President Joe Biden is in Indonesia at the moment. It's the middle of the night there, 3 a.m. There. I imagine, but I don't know, that this would be one of those knock on the bedroom door, wake up moments for President Biden. They would want to let him know that this has happened, not least because he, more than anyone else, has said so many times that the United States and NATO would defend every inch of its territory. Now, this missile appears to have struck in a Polish village due north of Ukraine's third city of Lviv in the far west of the country. it's almost happened a number of times before. I remember when I was there a few months ago, there was a Ukrainian missile depot that is to the west of Lviv that the Russians managed accurately to hit. Now, was this a case of a missile misfiring and going unintentionally over into Poland, into NATO territory? Or was it a test by the Russians? Either way, it is certainly now a test for NATO, a test for the West in terms of how they respond. Remember that NATO has, and primarily the Americans, have been channeling huge numbers of weapons over the border from Poland into Ukraine, and it may well become clear that some of those weapons were coming over the border near or around the village that was hit. So all these details will become clear over the course of the next few hours, I would imagine. President Biden, as I say, is in Indonesia, but he's due to fly back to the United States over the next 12 hours, a very long journey. But we're told from officials that there is no expectation that he will return early, that his plan is to return as scheduled. But this is certainly a test for NATO in terms of how it responds to yes, one missile, but 2 people dead, and crucially on NATO soil.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there for us, US correspondent. Well, joining me now is the former Chief of the General Staff, Lord Richard Dannett. Very good to talk to you. Well, reports then of this strike on a NATO country. What are the priorities right now?
Well, the absolute top priority is to establish what actually happened, because if we take, or anybody takes decisions on poor information, then we're bound to make poor decisions. So the really important thing is to gather information as to what actually happened. And then there needs to be a rapid assessment as to analysing what happened and why it happened. I think there probably at this stage there are 2 major explanations. One, it was an error on the part of the Russians. That might be right, but it might not be right. Equally, the alternative explanation is that it's something of a test to see what NATO will do. As your correspondents have said, and the press conference which you were carrying earlier made quite clear, an attack on one NATO member is a breach of Article 5, and therefore it's an attack on all member states. But we want to make sure that we don't rush into a wider conflict as a result of miscalculation or a mistake. So establishing what's happened is really important, and then cool heads need to analyse what our response should be. But at this stage, we should be very, very cautious.
Well, in terms of that NATO response, as you say, as we all know by now, this Article 5 of the treaty, that an attack on one NATO nation is an attack on them all. Before that, of course, is Article 4, which would call for emergency consultations. That perhaps is the route that Poland might initially follow.
Well, I would certainly hope so, because we all know that jaw is better than war. So the open channels and the back channels should be being worked vigorously at the present moment to try and find out not just what happened, but why it happened. Modern technology is pretty accurate, so it's quite difficult to explain away that this might have been an accident. If it wasn't an accident, then actually it was a test of the West's response. And that's something that's got to be thought through very, very carefully. And that's why I said just now, cool heads are required to make sure that this appalling war does not get escalated as a result of miscalculation or a quick decision on behalf of an aggrieved party.
But of course, Lord Dannett, what is not in doubt yet again today is this wave of missile strikes by Russia on many, many targets, civilian targets in Ukraine, seen as thumbing their nose after the G20 summit, in which President Zelensky addressed that summit, referred to it as the G19, of course, saying that Russia really should be excluded. It clearly is almost, or is it already, a rogue state now?
Well, there's no doubt at all that the tough words spoken at the G20 have been met by probably almost a predictable response by Russia to continue its outrageous attack on Ukrainian civilian targets. We've seen it over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks that Vladimir Putin wants to destroy as much of the critical national infrastructure of Ukraine that he possibly can, particularly targeting their electricity capability, which of course then gets into water and all the rest of it, to make life as miserable as possible for Ukrainian people, because he has this rather naive thought that he could break the will of the Ukrainian people and they'll change their mind about the war. We have a Ukrainian couple living with us here in Norfolk. They're not going to have their minds changed by that. I don't think the people in Ukraine will. So it's a very naive thought that he's got, but it's a pathetic reaction to the tough words spoken at the G20, that once again the Russians launch a myriad of missiles at Ukrainian targets. And then, of course, for good measure, there's this swipe at Poland. And, of course, this is a classic Putin tactic. And over the last 5, 10 years, he's posed various questions of the West. That big cyber attack on Estonia, the intervention in Syria, and various other events that he's engineered. He just wants to know what our response is going to be, because what he really, really wants is to get a fracture within the unanimity of NATO and the West. That's what he hopes for most, to try and get the West to fracture and for us to start disagreeing amongst ourselves. And that's why this attack in Poland, we absolutely need to know the information. We need to be very clear in our analysis, very cool-headed about it, and then decide what the right thing to do is. And as things currently stand, probably to accept a rather lame excuse from the Russians, if offered, that actually it was a mistake. But we don't want to rush into a wider war as a result of a miscalculation.
But would the Russians even go that far? We know their form on that. They'll claim it's a false flag. The Ukrainians did it, or the Poles did it, or NATO did it. But if NATO does establish that this was Putin testing the waters, testing the border, what should the response be to show that NATO will not crumble?
Well, we need to see what the Russian response is. Remember the near miss of the rivet joint aircraft, which the Russians said was a mistake. Well, we, the UK, accepted that as a reasonable explanation, because we, as I said just now, we don't want to get into a wider war as a result of miscalculation. You mentioned Article 4. Article 4 is absolutely right, that all the channels of communication should be opened for Poland to actually say to the Russians, you know, what is going on here? And it's really important that there is as much discussion and understanding and negotiation as possible, because if we take the alternative explanation that this was a deliberate attack on Poland, then it puts us into Article 5 territory. And that is a very dangerous place to be, because it then poses the question to NATO, what are you going to do? I don't think we want to be there. We want to be very, very cautious and just watch this situation very clearly, understand what actually has happened, but be pretty cautious. Being cautious doesn't mean to say we're going to be weak, but what we don't need to be is to be rash and escalate unnecessarily.
Well, General Lord Downer, thank you once again for laying out all those options so clearly, calmly and dispassionately. Very good talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your input. Let's talk now to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who was listening to everything that Lord Downer had to say. And listening to that, Dominic, it seems we are in tenser times now.
Yes, we are, and as Lord Downer was saying there, the paramount importance is establishing the facts, and that we presume is what American, NATO, Western officials are trying to do in what back channels they have with Russia at the moment. In terms of the facts that we know that 2 people have died in an explosion in Poland, in what seems to be in a bit of farmland. A few kilometres from the border with Ukraine. We've seen pictures on social media of a very big crater that doesn't look like it was caused by an agricultural accident, with a tractor and some agricultural vehicle near it badly damaged, and we know that 2 people have died. Now, only one American official has said what he believes has happened, he or she, and that is an unnamed American intelligence official speaking to Associated Press, saying that he says, or she says, missile. So at least one missile has landed, fired by Russia and landed in Poland. But Pentagon, though, is not confirming that, says it can't confirm these reports, which is interesting because, as I understand, the American military has an ability to track pretty much any ballistic missile above a certain size.
What's that?
Once
It's
it goes
where
into
they
the
do like
atmosphere,
meetings and that,
and therefore would have some kind of handle on,
and like
where the
gather
missiles, many
information.
missiles that Russia was
And
trying
if they
to
have
Well, I think
where they came from
What?
and where they went. But the moment
the both of you can stop.
if they have enough information to prove that it wasn't an accident, or that it was meant to hit something else, even if it's an accident, they should still go in. And
Think about it. If we're supporting Ukraine, well, just I feel like we should thank Russia because we're helping Ukraine by just giving soldiers. Am I right?
What?
Do you know how UK are just giving them soldiers? We're helping them win the fight. Technically, we're
you
helping.
say that we're giving them soldiers.
Flying, not weapons.
We're giving them
But-
weapons.
Yeah, but think about it. If we're helping them, can we help? We should be helping them like a lot more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
I've got to put.
we also have to have weapons to defend.
True. Yeah, but when I'm on bed, we can help them more.
I can't wait until I wake up and look on Twitter and see that we're going in. Oh, I might not even sleep tonight. I actually generally might just stay up because I've got half day tomorrow, and that's easy.
Daniel, think about it. Russia's gonna fire a nuke on Vladimir.
Yeah, you do realise they fire a nuke. It's not even confirmed that they will. Like if Putin just presses the red button, it has to go through the generals. They have to say yes or no. If one of them says no, then it doesn't fire.
Apparently, one time, Russia, there's like a submarine, there's like the submarine thing, and basically,
Yeah, a nuclear submarine.
yeah,
Yeah,
then
NATO has way more nuclear submarines than Russia and China combined.
people said, oh, we shot them, and everyone thought it was gonna be the Russians, and America, and then I said, he saved you.
NATO would win in a nuclear war.
Across Ukraine. The most likely explanation is it was a missile that was shot and landed in Polish territory. And
What?
America and the UK and France combined. Actually, no. I think it's just America has more nuclear submarines than Russia. So our nukes can go anywhere pretty much.
The thing is, Russia's the biggest country, but it had got, it's had got like a lot of people.
It has, but it's mostly just like grass and fields.
Either way,
How many people live there?
Huh?
How many people live there?
There's a lot. Like a lot.
A billion.
I won't say a billion. Oh, the population of the world now is 8 billion.
Dominic, what is that process then?
Yeah.
Given that coordinated action
More people have to die,
required,
man. We're overcrowding the world.
Is necessary. What is the process for NATO? Given as we all know, that the senior leaders of NATO countries.
I'm not gonna.
I'm literally not even going to play games. I'm just watching this guy.
How does he coordinate this all? Should Poland call for the Article 4 for an emergency consultation? Are we likely to see a big summit fairly soon?
I'll put 2022.
Huh?
1 billion.
What?
It's like I swear, like I don't know how many years ago it was like 7.4 billion. Should have got a lot.
Yeah.
Organised and planned from overseas, and therefore required a response by the entire alliance. So it would require, the first instance, it would require the Secretary General of NATO to be in touch with government leaders. Then it would require some kind of meeting, whether that's
I'll have a look. I'll have a look at
through telecommunications or other forms of.
Jesus Christ! You telling me we went to? This is what I mean. Goals like 200 million babies within 1 year.
And
300,
therefore, it's
which is
something
part
that
of the
could happen
Ukrainian
with
defense
the
system.
heads of government and the
That's
NATO Secretary General deciding together
Sorry, I'm Scottish.
that NATO's Article 5 was breached.
I like yeah, Sam. Right, is it top stories? Or was it live TV?
The leaders are all together
What do you mean?
and they will,
Yeah, which one go on live TV or top stories?
I think a lot of government leaders will be being woken
Live
up
TV.
In the wee hours of the morning.
Okay.
I'd watch it
Able to
live.
meet, but I think the priority at the moment is not to get
Wait, are
ahead
you
of
watching it
ourselves.
live? Can you see
the
where it says
priority
Kiev
for NATO
force
and
or
officials and for intelligence agencies
what?
is to work out what's happened and to get some kind of response from the Russians. And the Russians have already responded by saying that that this was a
I'm gonna message to you.
to bring out the
you see where it says
the Russian Defense
I
Ministry saying
can't say
statements
that.
to the
That
Polish media and officials about the alleged fall of Russian missiles in the
PRZDOWO.
area of the village where it happened is a deliberate
You know where it says that
provocation
do?
in order to escalate the situation. Those strikes
Go.
targets near the Ukrainian-Polish state border.
Is it on the live TV thing?
Yeah. The Polish media from the scene of the village has nothing to do with
Wait, PRZ.
PRZ.
But behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's where they've hit, and that's in Poland. It's on the border between Poland and Ukraine.
Oh man,
and the capital of Poland is Warsaw,
many of them were precision-guided missiles.
And the capital of Ukraine is Kiev.
It's rare for those to malfunction, but it is possible they have malfunctioned in the past. They will be trying to get from the Russians
Wait, your mic is lagging.
As to what has happened. That they are then going to be able to present to their own people, to their own governments and leaders, and hope. I think the West will be hoping there is an innocent explanation.
Yeah, you're lagging.
Otherwise, the alternative, as we've heard from Lord Dannis and Mark Stone there, is very dark because it leads us down an escalation process that is hard to reverse once it's begun.
Dominic, just lastly, in terms of the background, we know that, well, almost since the start of the conflict, that Russia has been warning about those NATO members bordering Ukraine and their role, in particular Poland's role, in acting as a marshalling yard for the munitions that NATO is supplying to Ukrainian forces, the training.
You know what? It's better
Yeah.
Concerns.
It's because I'm on Discord.
It has, and it has effectively said that Russia is engaged in a kind of proxy.
He's excited for World War III, so I want to experience it. I want to experience history.
But they've certainly expressed their frustration and their anger that the West is funneling weapons to Ukraine, is training Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian military, is advising them, giving them intelligence. And they have at times that could lead to
over the age of 18 and below the age of 60, I think, can get drafted into the army to go into war.
This could lead to attacks on the routes that are used by the West to funnel weapons into Ukraine, and it's been left open, I think, to left ambiguous.
You might be going to the army.
But I don't think so, because they wouldn't trust me with a weapon.
Into Ukraine would be attacked within Ukraine or outside Ukraine.
Yeah, think about it. There's tell me, I can't go
threaten
I'm looking.
Ukraine could be seen as a threat to NATO, but as
I just want to see, like, what would a war, like a full-on world war, look like with social
well aware
media?
that they are against the NATO alliance. NATO boots are not on the ground.
I'm not talking like Russia versus Poland,
in many other
Russia
ways,
versus Ukraine. I'm talking like a world war.
But this, I think, is not an attack on NATO weapon supplies or routes going into Ukraine. It appears to be the attack on an innocent bit of farmland.
I'll take a bit, okay? I'll take one bit. I'll take one bit. I'll go play
in this hit. And so it will be crucial, I think, for the Polish national security.
We're about to GTA. It's soon.
The information they can from the border as to what intelligence they have about the missiles coming in. And then get a further sense of whether this attack appears to be deliberate or whether it's simply a missile that was aimed at a number of installations around Lviv, which is a western Ukrainian city very close to the border.
My phone's shocking now.
Merely gone astray, and has landed and overshot and landed in farmland in Poland.
Dominic, many thanks for the analysis. Dominic Waghorn there, our international affairs editor. Just let me share with you this from President Zelensky of Ukraine. He's commented about that missile strike, and he's in no doubt. He says it is a significant escalation in the conflict and that action is needed. That from President Zelensky of Ukraine. Well, let's talk to our defence and security editor, Deborah Haynes. And Deborah, President Zelensky then in no doubt, as I say, they're saying it is a significant escalation, and that is precisely what NATO is trying to work out.
I'm going back on the law, okay?
Yes, it's very important for NATO to understand, or NATO members to understand exactly what's happened before they can come out with any kind of response, because this is such a grave situation. Poland is a member of the NATO
2038. How do I change it?
The war in Ukraine was launched by Russia.
It's saying, do you know the time being down there?
Huge concern about the potential
it's saying
for escalation beyond Ukraine's borders. Ukraine is not a member of the NATO alliance, and NATO allies and Russia. It has to
on one thing, and on the phone it says 2039.
Very hard. Have been trying very hard to avoid direct confrontation between Russia and NATO, because everybody knows that kind of direct confrontation.
I wonder if I'd say the next probably years or 20 years.
War, potentially the Third World War. It's that serious. This is what we're talking about here. And that's why it's absolutely crucial to understand exactly what's happened, who was responsible for these explosions. Was it a deliberate strike? It would seem perhaps not. And also then how it happened, and the NATO allies will then be wanting to think about their response. Of course, there is Article 5, which is that collective, unifying, fundamental principle of.
I feel like Bush the pussies, man. The pussies.
They actually
and all come to the defence of the.
I swear, I think Putin interfering with NATO. That's it. He'd probably be like.
Well, he will literally die within, I'd say, 4 days because of special forces. Like, they will go into the Kremlin where he lives and kill him without anyone knowing.
Action. All 30 member states will have to agree, and they'll have to agree.
Yeah, but I feel like when one of these I feel like
all 30 member states
you're not going to have
agree.
A rush, I don't think, to come out with.
I think we definitely we might be struggling.
But it is incredibly serious, and you're getting a sense of that seriousness from the different statements we're getting from different officials.
What did we should do again?
Releasing a comment from an official saying that we are looking into these reports and closely coordinating with our ally Poland. For Ukraine, it's you've just talked about what the president was saying about calling this an escalation. It's an escalation, of course, in the crisis, but the key will be whether or not it was deliberate, and that is going to be fundamental in NATO formulating its response, and there will be a response of some sort, but we'll have to wait to see what that will look like.
And Deborah, as you say there, well, those facts being established, but what is indisputable is that yet again today, Russia has been murdering Ukrainian civilians with these missile strikes on major population centres right across the country, which is seen as the Russian response to the G20 being addressed by President Zelensky.
It must seem quite bizarre for people who maybe don't follow the sort of NATO alliance sort of policies closely, to see a country in Europe that is clearly very allied with the UK, with other European NATO allies, and yet this bombardment, as you say, is taking place in Ukraine, and there aren't NATO boots on the ground trying to defend the Ukrainians. But it just underlines the fact that NATO and Ukraine are separate. NATO is not directly involved in the conflict. Ukraine is not a member of the NATO alliance. And so it can't draw on the fundamental principles of collective defence and deterrence, which is what is enshrined by being a member of NATO. And instead, though, you're having individual nations, many of them NATO member states, many of them also not, unilaterally providing support to Ukraine with these weapons, with enhanced weapon systems. The attacks today and these blasts across the border in Poland are already prompting countries such as Latvia to speak out and talk about increased air defences. You'll remember at the beginning of the conflict there was that plea from Ukraine to close the skies, to get NATO allies to come and close.
Also, states got to agree.
And at the time, countries like the UK, like the US, said they did not want to take that step because
I think 57
the skies would mean
countries in
having,
NATO, 57
British,
or 56,
American,
and 30
other
of them
NATO
have to
allied
agree,
air defense
and
systems will be
the
surface to air
20 something
missile
that don't
systems
agree
and
don't have
fighter
to go in.
jets patrolling the skies,
30,
shooting down
30
states have
Russian
to
missiles. And that
agree
is that
for
direct
NATO to go
confrontation that I was
in
talking about
and
before.
go
Both
into
sides
Ukraine.
have been trying to avoid. And so what you've seen instead
fight
of
Russia,
this,
this I'll go NATO. I'll go with Russia.
Intervention by countries like
war,
the UK in terms
she'll
of
think like
protecting
China will
NATO,
get involved.
protecting
But China won't
Yeah.
get involved.
airspace. They have been
I
giving
think China
Ukraine
will
the means to protect the airspace themselves.
Because
They obviously
Biden
have their
had
own
a
air
meeting with
defense
China
capabilities. They have their own air force.
and said
but
that
over
they're
the past
stable
nearly 9
and that they
months
know
now,
what they're
that
doing.
has been significantly bolstered by the
Liam,
weapon systems that have been
probably
coming
gonna
into
happen.
Ukraine
Yeah,
from across NATO allied countries. It's not a NATO mission, it's individual
you never,
allies.
it's written
This
down,
sort of
so
NATO,
there should
contact group led
technically
by the
there
United
should
States
go
that has
in
been absolutely
because it's written
fundamental
down.
in helping Ukraine to
Article
protect
5.
itself. And yes,
I'm
we've
gonna
seen
make a
today
prediction.
this
I'm gonna say it's
horrendous
gonna start
bombardment
Saturday
once more in
this
Ukraine,
weekend.
but it would have been even
Nah,
worse
I
had it
think
not
it'll be
been
sooner.
for the weapons
way
that Ukraine
sooner.
has
I
been given to
reckon-
protect itself.
Thursday.
Okay, Deborah,
I
many
reckon
thanks
probably
for the
midday
assessment there,
tomorrow.
our defence and security editor.
Because they ain't
Deborah
going to take
Hayes.
that long.
Well, I wanna
It'll
bring
take
in
that
Siobhan
overnight, I'd
Robbins
say, in a
now,
meeting.
joins us from Berlin.
Because in
And,
Poland, they're 2
Siobhan,
hours ahead.
In terms of people perhaps just joining us, let's rewind a bit and tell us more about the circumstances, what we know and what we don't know.
Yes, so it's been reported that a missile or missiles, Russian missile or missiles, has hit
Like the war, because
a
Poland is
grain
NATO.
store,
Yeah.
in Poland on the Ukrainian border.
I just sent it. I
said
Liam said it could be tomorrow midnight. Are you scared?
People have died. We know that the Pentagon has said it's looking into these reports. That
I wonder if
has
she's
called
scared.
an emergency meeting saying this is
See,
a crisis situation. He's talking to his defence officials now to find out what's going on. We know a similar situation is happening in Hungary as well. They're having an emergency meeting too, and we're getting reaction from various countries across Europe.
He'll just say it's drama.
In the US, and I think what's important to note, which everyone has been saying tonight, is there's very
He'll just say it's drama.
whether it's coming
It's
out
not,
of NATO
no.
or the US or Europe.
Tell her to go on YouTube and
around
type in
what
Sky
has
News.
happened, and that shows you just how tense this situation is. I'm going to give you a flavour of
Because
some
even
of the
Vladimir
lines that have been coming out of
Zelensky,
various
the
places, so that you can really get up to speed with what's going on. So
Prime-
first of all, we've had
President
NATO
of
saying we're looking into
Ukraine
these reports and closely
said
coordinating
that
with our
Russian
ally
missiles have struck
Poland. Then we've had
Poland.
President Zelensky of Ukraine saying we've warned that Russia's actions are not limited to Ukraine. Reuters, a news agency, reporting that the Russian Defense
I just
Ministry
really want us to go in.
that these are Russian missiles deliberately
If
striking.
we don't, it's just gonna say that NATO's scared of them.
To escalate the situation.
But I don't know why we would be
And
scared
then
of
we've
them.
had Estonia coming out saying
NATO.
this is most alarming.
There's
The
no
Czech
need to be
Republic
scared of
saying
them.
if Poland confirms
Right.
the
You
missiles
should see
also
their
hit its
weapons
territory,
that
this will
they
be a
had.
further escalation
Like,
by
they had
Russia,
World
and
War
really
II style
that's the point
weapons.
now that everyone is looking at. Was this a deliberate
modern
day.
attack on Poland, which we
No,
know
you
has
saw the
been
video 'cause you're
extremely
saying-
strong in its stance against Russia ever since this war in Ukraine broke out, or was this an
You're saying
accident?
that.
That's
You're
what
saying
the
that.
conversations will be
If
going
NATO
on
doesn't
behind
go
the
in,
scenes right now. What's going
then
to
that
happen?
will
Because
say
we've
that
said it time
NATO's
and time
starting
again
to be
over the last
weak.
hour or so. The
like
big
starting to get
problem
weak
here
because
is that Poland
it's
is
written
a
down
NATO
in Article
member,
5
and
that
is an issue
an attack on
because
one
this is a
nation
deliberate attack. Then
is an
there'll be
attack on all
conversations around
nations
whether
in
other NATO
NATO.
members should react.
Well, it makes
to
sense.
protect
Think
this
about it.
member.
We've
It
got
won't
to be
happen
NATO.
immediately, as you
Know what I mean?
heard from Deborah
Yeah.
Haynes, and there'll obviously
That's
be
what
questions about, you know,
like
was this
Slovakia,
an
I think,
accident? Was
their
this something that the
Prime
Russians
Minister
can
President
deny to
has said that
diffuse
they're
the
willing to
situation?
defend
But they
every
will be the key
inch
questions
of
now
NATO
being looked
territory.
at around the world.
Yeah, oh, look at his Snapchat
Okay,
post.
Siobhan, thank you very much indeed. Siobhan Robbins there
Right, when
in
was
Berlin,
this?
and
What,
you've heard
the
Siobhan telling us
jet?
there that the
Was
Russian
it go?
Defence Ministry
How is
denying
this
any involvement in the incident at all, saying it's a deliberate
Why is this
provocation.
got so
So
blue?
let's get more now on the view
It's because it's
from Moscow
a
with
clear
our
sky.
correspondent there,
They're
Diana
jets, you know,
Magnay,
they're
and,
typhoons.
Diana, I suppose pretty much
Can I ask you a
yes,
question?
part
Why
of this
is-
would be the Russian
It's not
position,
circle with two
presumably
dots in
then
it.
they're saying
They're
it's a
because
so-called
they're the
false
jets.
flag operation.
If you have
No,
a,
I want to.
yeah, they're
Well,
the
they're
jets.
just saying
The
that it doesn't
circle
have anything
is
to
where the
do
jets
with them,
are,
and that
and
there were
then
no
the
strikes
two dots are the
from
jets.
Russian missile
but I've like
systems
dotted
along
them
the
so you can see them.
Ukrainian-Polish border
Snow,
today,
snow.
and that the
What?
photos that are appearing
Wait,
on
wait, when
Polish
did
media
Russia do it?
of the weapons debris
Russia
have
did it,
nothing
like,
to do with
about
Russian
an hour and a half
weapons,
ago, I'd say.
and they're calling it a deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation. So, I mean, I think there are two possible theories. One is, was this a mistake? The other is it a way of testing NATO's resolve at a time when the G20 is taking place? President Putin is obviously not there. It
Mate,
could
wait
also
till I
be
go
that,
to
for
college.
example,
Like,
this was one of those missiles
I'm not
that
gonna
was
stop
one
talking
of
when I get to
many
college.
today, striking key
That's right.
Ukrainian energy infrastructure, especially,
And
Sorry,
which was taken
Mo will
down by
literally know
Ukrainian air
nothing because
defense,
he
and we
doesn't
have
watch the
debris
news or anything.
hitting in Poland, and we know that 2 people were killed. So
And
there
it's
are
gonna
a
be like-
number of
so
possible
Russia has hit
eventualities.
NATO.
And as we were hearing from
And
Lord Danet, as we were hearing
Poland's
from Deborah
NATO.
Haynes there,
I
I
say,
think
yeah.
that it will take a lot of
And
cool
you say,
minds
I
to
bet
make
you'll
sure
say
that
like,
there is no
is
dramatic
Poland near Russia? No, it's
escalation.
not, mate. It's not. It's near
but,
Belarus,
you
and
know,
it's
knowing
near
Russia's
Latvia. Nope,
track record,
Lithuania.
it is
What?
quite
Yeah.
possible that they
Can I
would
name
try
me
and
10
test the waters
NATO
with a
countries
strike,
instead?
What?
which they can plausibly
Can I
deny.
name me 10 NATO
But at the
countries?
same time, if this was just
Huh?
Can I name me 10 NATO countries?
Can
one
I
of the many
name you
missiles that
10
hit
Yeah.
NATO
Ukraine
countries?
or were
Okay.
targeted at Ukraine today and was taken down by
You
Ukrainian
can.
air defense, and it landed the other side
No,
of
I'm
the
not-
border.
No,
So
no,
I'm not
that
doing
too
it.
is a
I can
very real
do 15.
So I think
Go
we're
on.
in a dangerous
Latvia,
situation.
Estonia,
one where, of course, you
Lithuania,
have
Finland,
all the
Sweden,
leaders of Eastern Europe and
America,
NATO,
UK,
wondering
France,
what to do
Germany,
next. And one where I imagine
Spain,
if the Ministry of Defence's latest post is to go by,
Greece.
It's
Russia
Turkey now.
will
yeah,
deny
Yeah, Greece.
over and
Turkey,
over
Greece,
again. The
Italy,
question is, if we
um,
discount
Austria
the idea
is
that this
not
was an
one.
accident, what is
Um,
Vladimir Putin
How
trying
about-
to
how about-
achieve?
Right,
Does
right,
he
right.
really want to escalate this in a way that involves
But
NATO?
now you can't think
Of course,
Ireland,
his own
Argentina.
country, his people have
Ireland,
been told
Wales.
Argentina.
continually that this is essentially
Ireland, Wales.
effectively a war against
No,
NATO in any
Ireland
case,
is
and that NATO is supplying the
well,
weapons
Wales
to
is the
Ukraine.
UK.
NATO is essentially the master of Ukraine.
So
that this
is
is
part
a war
of
for
Ireland.
Russia's defence against
I have a Scotland, actually,
NATO.
Scotland.
Scotland's also
and I have no
UK.
doubt that President Putin feels
Oh, true.
pretty aggrieved that he's not sitting as a trusted member of the
that's-
G20, or in fact in the
There's
G20 at
more.
all, and wants to
I
make
just can't think of them.
mark the moment, especially after
They're like the
President
main
Zelensky's
ones that I've
address,
named.
calling it
I think
the
Brazil's one
G19,
as well.
etc.
Argentina.
But whether he is choosing to make a deliberate strike on a NATO
Australia,
member state,
New
knowing
Zealand.
the consequences, knowing the
Japan,
responsibilities for
South
all NATO
Korea,
members under Article 5 is a completely different
Right,
story.
South Korea's gone
And I
out.
think
Yeah.
that cool heads should prevail.
Okay,
We
no,
need to sit
No,
tight
what's
and try
South
and
Korea,
work
man?
out,
What's South Korea?
what
Do you
went
mean?
on.
Jim Korea.
Diana,
No,
many
that's
thanks,
North
Diana
Korea.
Magnay in Moscow
Oh.
there, and
My
let's
God.
just share with you a
Yeah.
photograph just in of the aftermath of that.
Oh,
The thing is-
look on
strike
Sky
on the,
News. That's the
Polish
aftermath.
Village Przewodów on
Yeah.
the border with Ukraine. Well, you can see here the notable plume of smoke there. That's what we've got so far.
Plume
Those
of smoke.
reports that a Russian missile has crossed the border between Ukraine and Poland. Poland and hit that village, Przewodów. 2 people are reportedly dead. Well, let's get the latest now with Daniel Fry, the former US ambassador to Poland. Very good to talk to you, Ambassador.
Actually,
and,
I'm gonna,
of course, facts being established here.
That, you know.
But give us your overview. Are we
what
in a delicate and potentially dangerous situation now?
Possibly, but facts matter, and we don't know what the facts are.
What?
There's a saying that the U.S. military has: first reports are always wrong. First reports are always wrong. We have to determine whether or not it was a Russian missile that hit the village. I just heard within the last 15 minutes a speculation from the U.S. government that it may have been a Russian missile fired at Ukrainian targets, a Ukrainian interceptor that landed on Poland. Not
go
clear
closer.
what we're dealing with.
Mr. Clean.
Plausible.
Mr.
Russia
Clean?
chose to escalate.
Who's
Russia has deliberately attacked Poland. This is possible, given that Putin's armies are losing on the battlefield. That
type it in Discord. Type it in Discord.
Vulnerable because he's got Russia into a war that it's losing.
Type it in the House of Commons.
Kind of desperate
in the
escalation
text
on his part is plausible, but plausible doesn't make it real.
What?
And we need to
the one who's talking now.
Article 5
the one who's talking
applies to Poland, which is a full NATO member.
What,
that means an attack on one is an attack on all. So the question is, if the United States were attacked, if a Russian missile landed in Alaska and killed 2 people,
he's not the president. Joe Biden's the president.
At a minimum, we would make sure that the defenses were available so that a further attack would not succeed, or we would decrease the chances that it would succeed. The second thing we would have to do is determine what our military and other responses would be. But that depends on the attribution, and it's a bad practice
NATO countries.
To start spinning out hypotheses
Belgium,
of what
Denmark,
might be
there's Norway, Bulgaria, Canada,
Croatia,
what
the thing we're responding to.
Indeed.
So let's be careful and get the facts.
Indeed. But, I mean, it tells us, we knew already, of course, but it illustrates to the rest of NATO, to the rest of the world, just
Estonia,
how much on the front line
Romania,
Poland
Slovakia,
is crucial in terms of the NATO response, in terms
Albania,
of getting materials
Croatia,
and training to the
North
Ukrainians, and
Italy,
yes, establish the facts here. But what does then
Norway,
the rest
Portugal,
of NATO, what does the
UK,
rest of the West
US,
have to do to reassure the Poles
Greece,
here?
Turkey, Germany.
An essential platform for the supplying of arms and other kinds of assistance to Ukraine. Absolutely critical. They're a frontline state. They have, from the beginning of the war, understood that they might be attacked. I was in Poland a few weeks after the war started.
Are you on NATO? The official side?
So NATO has to treat Polish concerns, of course, seriously. They are a major NATO ally.
I'm on NATO.
How many countries
a serious contributor to the Western efforts to support
Albania.
We need to make sure that they
Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech, Denmark, France.
NATO is an alliance of 30 member states.
The forces they need
30.
to protect their airspace.
Not Luxembourg, Netherlands,
those kinds of decisions need to be made very quickly. The second kind of decision is, was this a deliberate Russian attack, and if so, what do we do about it? And those decisions have to be made with the Poles by
in between Germany and Belgium.
Also quickly, but on the basis of facts. So there are 2 stages here. One is to make sure the Poles know we've got their backs, and 2, make sure the Russians know they're not going to get away with it.
Great to get your input, Ambassador. Thank you very, very much indeed. Daniel Fry, the former US Ambassador to Poland, reacting to that news. Much more, of course, coming up at 9 o'clock. But 2 people have died after a Russian missile.
2 hours ago,
apparently
Russian
hit
missiles
a Polish
crashed into
village
NATO
close to the border
Poland.
with Ukraine.
Wait, what's it? Live UA maps. It's actually such a good.
Now let's see how the pros
such a
do
good
it.
app.
Effortless.
Oh.
Straight in.
Wix Trade Pro sponsors coverage of the Grand
Right,
Slam
it says
of
on here
darts.
3 hours ago. Uh-huh.
I'm gonna bring my phone with me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, that's a big crater. If you go on my stream, Fortnite Master 01, it shows a picture of the bomb, of the missile aftermath. It's a pretty big crater with a tractor and like a trailer. Oh, I can copy. I'm gonna put it in the Discord. There we go. That's it. That's it. No, fuck it, I'm gonna miss them as well, I don't care. Matt Hancock isn't doing the trial, so I don't care. You should download this app, it's called, like, I'll just copy and paste it, copy.
Oh, is it a new war game? The war game?
What?
Wait, is it on Sled?
What you on about?
What's that? What's that?
Oh, it's it tracks like what the Russians are doing and what's happened in Ukraine and like what's happened. Yeah, that's it. Live UA maps.
What's the app called?
Live UA maps.
UI. UI, that's it.
Live UA map.
Got it.
I'll go on the link.
This is Sky News at
No,
9 o'clock.
is it like a boy
Headlines
orange?
this
I'm going
evening.
to die.
Russia denies
Yeah,
claims
yeah,
that
yeah,
its
yeah.
missiles have hit
I got it.
NATO member Poland, killing 2 people in a village
Okay,
bordering
just down.
Ukraine.
This administration views NATO as
Okay,
one
got
of
it.
the most important
So,
transatlantic
what's happening now?
defensive alliances.
Like the blue
As Russian missiles
stuff
strike a number of cities across
is,
Ukraine, President Zelensky says
Ukraine
an
and,
attack
like,
on
the
Poland
good
is a
stuff.
significant escalation.
And then you'll see like the red. In
Also
the
tonight,
morning,
a coroner
all
concludes
of
a
the
2-year-old boy died because of
No,
fire
leave it up.
in his family's flat.
huh?
And the Prime
Sorry,
Minister
what's it?
refuses to say sorry for the economic turmoil
No, I
caused
have
by
got
his
to do.
predecessor, Liz Truss.
I'm going to
Acknowledged from the steps of Downing Street in the first statement
Liam,
that I
what's
made to
going
the
on?
country, an acknowledgement that mistakes were made.
You don't want to apologise. I
Why?
What
I
I'm
have got
telling
you
you now
to
is fix them.
What's going on with me? Do it.
Hello there, good evening. We begin
Yeah.
then with the breaking
we
news.
can-
Tonight. It's been
What'd you say?
reported that Russian missiles
I'll
have
begin
killed
to do
2
it.
people in Poland.
Now
in the
I
course
work.
of
Just
NATO.
go on the
Well,
link.
these
Have
are
you
the
gone on the
latest
link in the
images from the
Discord?
scene in Shevardov, a village
Yeah,
near
let's
the
have a
border
look.
with
Is it on the
Ukraine.
track with me and
The
you?
Associated Press news
It's in the
agency
House
is
of
quoting a
Commons.
senior
Right.
US intelligence
Yep.
official as saying that
Yeah, just
2
go on that,
people had been
and
killed in the
that's it.
strikes carried out
It
by
should do it.
Russia. Well, the Russian
Right.
Ministry of Defense
Where's
has
the map?
denied that it is to blame,
It all
calling
loaded.
the reports a deliberate provocation
There's
in
loads.
order to escalate the
So you
situation.
go.
In the last hour, the US
Is
State
it the
Department
mark?
held a news
mark.
briefing as
Hold up.
Western allies
Let me
insisted
go on
they were
the
waiting
app.
for more
Got it.
information
Phone.
before deciding how to respond.
Look, Leon, we of course
go
are ready to stand with our NATO allies and partners.
Try,
but,
wait,
I want
Liam,
to
what's all
again
the red
be very
bits?
clear that we do
Oh,
not
all
want
the
to
red
get ahead
bits?
of hypotheticals.
Oh, bad.
So
we do
you
not
see where it
know
says
what has happened
Mariupol?
yet. We have seen reports out of
Where's
Poland.
that?
They, of
Like,
course, are incredibly concerning. and we're working with our
You see the
Polish
bomb
government
to the
and,
right of
our NATO
Ukraine
partners to get more information and to assess
in the red bit.
what has happened. We
Oh, actually, I've got some more Ukrainians.
determine appropriate next
Mean.
steps as well.
Just to follow up,
Yeah, I think Ukraine, the bomb.
Uh,
The bomb.
Intelligence officials.
Yeah, I see the bomb symbol.
Story.
So do you see the blue
Leon,
missile system, like air defense
what I
system?
can say from this
Yeah.
Yeah. Go to the right
in
of
front
that, and do you
all
see like a
on
bomb?
camera and on the record is that
Yeah, I see it. I see
Yeah.
it.
reports that we
It's
are
not
working with
explosive
So,
thing.
yeah. So where that is in the morning, that
get more information.
usually that is chock of
cannot
block of
confirm the
missiles.
reports of what has happened, or the
Yeah.
details,
So,
but we are working
who's
through
good?
the
Who's
process
good? Doing good so far? Russia or Ukraine?
Ukraine.
The situation here with the
You
defense
see,
minister putting out a short statement saying
if you
that,
go left, go to that blue thing again.
reports of
Go
Russian
down to
missiles
Zaporizhia.
landing in Poland are quote a
What
deliberate
was that?
Just river.
Oh,
Do you have a response
Yeah, go to
Zaporizhia.
that.
what they're
Then
saying
go
about
to the
this?
left.
Well,
You see like
the United
a
States
red
is
circle.
certainly not
Yeah.
Then go to the
trying
left
to,
again.
escalate
And then
or
left
incite
again
the
to leave a
situation
red
at all.
circle.
And like I said, we have seen
Is
these
it the
same
small one?
reports that
Yeah, do you
all
see
have,
two, like
and we are
one
working with the
small
Polish
circle
government,
and one big one?
to gather
Yeah,
more
Kherson,
information, and we are
that's
not
the
at a point where we can
first
confirm
like
some of these
city, major
reports that we are
city that they
seeing, and that's why
captured,
I'm
Russia
telling you
did
that we will
when they
determine
invaded.
what exactly has
And you'll never
transpired,
guess
and we
what.
will,
Russia
Well, a huge reaction
retreated from
certainly
there.
from European and NATO
Flipping out,
allies.
pussy.
Just really
Allez,
some
voilà,
of that
can you
as
click
we
on? You
look
click
at
on
those
them?
latest pictures from
Yeah,
the
they'll
scene,
show you like
the
pictures and
front
that.
of that as we look at those latest
I'm looking at the
pictures
news.
from the
Air
scene.
defences actively
The
air
Foreign Office
defences.
spokesperson,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
investigating these reports
Mm.
and liaising
People are
closely
saying
with
that it's
allies.
Ukrainian air
Pictures now, as
defense,
you can
but
see,
how
as
would
the
it be air
camera
defense
moves towards
when
the location
there has to be
of that
something in the
explosion.
air for it to
A NATO
defend?
official too, we are closely looking into these reports linked to that
Hey,
blast
you
in
sent me a new
Poland
stuff
and
again.
closely coordinating with
Nope.
our ally Poland.
You
The
did?
German
No,
Prime
I
Minister,
haven't.
my
Wait, what?
thoughts are with Poland. We're monitoring the
Right,
situation
Sorry.
closely. We're in contact with our
That's
Polish
true.
friends and NATO allies. The Slovak
I-
Prime
no,
Minister,
last
Eduard
time,
Heger,
5
very
hours.
concerned about the explosions in Poland. The
At
Slovak Defence Minister,
20 to
Russia's
4,
recklessness
I
is
sent
getting
you.
out of hand. Belgium's Alexander De Croo, Belgium strongly condemns the incident on Polish territory. And the Latvian Defence Minister saying that NATO could provide air defences to Poland and part of the territory of
off.
Ukraine. While it
Providing
is
air
reported by a
defence
French TV channel that
systems
France,
to-
in conjunction
to
with its
Poland.
NATO allies,
What's
is
that
carrying
gonna
out
do?
a
People have
removal of
died.
doubt, an investigation to
Two
remove
people have
any
died.
suspicion about
What are
what
they gonna do?
happened
Nothing.
and who is responsible. So let's head now
Wait,
to
where's that? It's on the news.
Washington. Keep
Yeah.
these pictures going as long as we can.
Which bit?
US
2
correspondent
hours ago.
James Matthews
No,
is
just-
there. And that is
No,
absolutely
on,
critical, is it not, James?
Sky News.
Right now,
I'm listening to it
before
while,
there is further response to find out exactly what
doing this.
happened.
Darling, who's that?
Exactly. The US is saying we need hard information. They're
It's
bending over
the
backwards to maintain a
news
holding
geezer,
position
basically.
on this one. President Biden, of course,
Sky
is in Bali at the
correspondent,
G20 summit,
Yesterday.
surrounded by national security advisors. We are told that there is no change in his schedule
Right, let me
as
see
of
if there's
yet, but you
even,
heard
like,
from the State Department. We've
let
had
me see
this
if
from the
there's
Pentagon
even
too. They are
any
working with the
military
Poles,
targets near
with
there.
their own
Benefit.
intelligence and with people on the
So
ground
it's,
to establish exactly what happened and what was the intent behind this, because that will be key in all of this. Was this intentional? Were these indeed Russian missiles, or was there, to some degree in this, an accident? There will be consequences, NATO-driven consequences.
If you go
It
on
will
to,
be a sliding
if you go
scale,
on to
depending
Google
on what
Maps,
was
yeah,
behind this
and,
particular
type
incident. Now,
in-
President Biden
I'll put it in Discord.
clearly
All you have to do
faces
is copy and
challenges. He
paste
is a
it,
man
and,
who has
if you
talked
noted
the
that.
talk in terms of
that's
NATO's
where
defence
it's
of
hit,
Ukraine
basically.
throughout this 8-month
And you can
conflict,
see
speaking
it
about
at the little
offering the
tone
full
at the
protection
bit.
of the United States for NATO
Okay.
allies.
We need to
He
hold
has
the whole message.
invoked, hasn't
Hold
he,
the message down.
Yeah.
Armageddon as a potential
It's not
consequence
working.
in this particular scenario. So for him, the challenge, and for
Oh, yeah,
his
upstairs.
NATO
Hold
allies,
on.
Copy check.
Yeah.
Copy
the
check.
challenge is to offer protection to a NATO member, to send an appropriate message
Sounded like a
to
little
Russia on the
village,
back
like,
of this,
why?
but also to preserve the authority of
Living
NATO
the
itself
life.
without tipping this
why would you
into
bother
a
them?
wider extended conflict.
I know. What's it called Poland for? You know what I mean?
Of course,
like they're
should they
literally.
admit
right
an
next
honest
to the border.
mistake, then that diplomatically would
Wait,
provide perhaps an
Bush
easier
against
route
Russia.
out of this, but there doesn't seem
No,
any
no, no,
sign
no,
of
like
that
to the border of
from
Ukraine.
Moscow.
I know I might
as of
measure
yet.
how
So
far it
essentially,
is.
much hinges on the investigation on
Apparently,
the
mate,
ground.
apparently
That will
it's,
take at least a
it's,
few
it's
hours, one
P-
imagines, although
Pres-
there is evidence on the scene. There will be evidence on radar, clear evidence to see what direction these missiles came from. So, within a few hours, we should have the hard information. And for NATO, who has been talking to President Biden in particular, we will see in due course whether that is followed up by an appropriate action that doesn't widen the scale of this conflict inappropriately.
James, thank you. Let's head straight to Moscow then, get the view of what is happening in Russia. And certainly the Russian Ministry of Defense Telegram channel, who is there, shows no sign of
if they're
a
backed
simple
up in a
apology.
corner
Should
and
it
they're
be
losing,
that caused
like they're
this,
losing that
their
much,
Telegram
that
channel saying
NATO's
the
starting to go
statements
into
of the
Russia,
Polish media
I
and
think they will.
officials about the alleged fall of Russian
But you never
missiles
know,
in
like
the area of the settlement of
America,
is a deliberate
with their
provocation
technology,
in
they're
order to
20
escalate
years
the situation.
ahead of pretty much.
They're
20 years in the future, basically, with their
no strikes
technology.
At the area between the
So
Polish
they
Ukrainian
could have
border, and that the
nuclear
wreckage
air
at the
defense,
scene published by
systems.
Polish media bears no relation to
You never
Russian
know.
firepower. Now, I think there are a number of possibilities. One is that it was a Russian missile and that it was a deliberate targeting of a NATO country. The other is that it was a Russian missile and it was a mistake, given the fact that there was a wide-ranging and what Ukrainian officials call the biggest strike on Ukrainian infrastructure since the start of this war 9 months ago today. The other is that it was a Russian missile intended for a target in Ukraine that was taken down by Ukrainian air defense.
That's the difference.
And either you have remnants of the Ukrainian air defense missile that is now in Poland or the original Russian missile. And I think all of those should be possible to determine through forensic examination of the weapon systems that are on the ground.
Oh,
the kind
so
of direction of
I
travel,
can measure it.
whether you do see
7.21
Ukrainian
kilometers.
anti-aircraft defense systems in use,
4.48
A300. So
miles.
I think that this will be possible to ascertain what exactly this was. You know, the Russians are essentially stating clearly this has nothing to do with them. And of course, it's very difficult to give any Russian claim at this stage in this conflict very much credibility.
A demonstration
and it is quite possible,
from where you live to somewhere.
That they are choosing to escalate in this way, claiming plausible deniability that this rocket attack had nothing to do with them. But it is also quite possible, as I said, that it is a mistake or that it was a missile targeted for Ukraine, brought down by Ukrainian air defense. And at the moment, we do not know. So I think that it is important to keep very cool heads because of NATO's responsibility that an attack on one is an attack on all. They do need to be absolutely sure of the specifics around this. And I would imagine that it is possible through forensic examination of the scene to determine what happened. You know, I don't think any side wants a dramatic escalation, but at the same time, given what we have seen in recent weeks, here in Russia, the loss of Kherson, the retreat, which Russia is trying to paint as a way of saving Russian lives. You know, President Putin is not in a great situation 9 months into this conflict. And there has been a lot of talk of other hybrid ways in which he could escalate, whether he might go down a nuclear route, whether he might do a strike like this on NATO territory. We don't know what it could be, but I think we need to act very cautiously to determine exactly what this was. And that is clearly the NATO's approach for now.
Yes, I mean, all sorts of explanations. Daniel Fried, former US ambassador to Poland, even suggesting he'd heard
it's
it could be
literally from
part
where
of
you
a
live
Ukrainian interceptor, part
to,
of
I'd
those
say,
air defense systems that you talked about, the possibility of being a remnant part of a Russian missile which had gone astray.
Actually, no.
If it was a deliberate act, and if that can be
it's bang
proven,
on. From
what
where
does that
you live
say
to Briar
about
Hill,
Russia's reaction
like
to the
2
G20 or the
buses.
G19, as President
That's not
Zelensky
far.
called it, the desperation possibly
not
of
far at
Russia,
all.
or whether they're fearful of any NATO response to what's happened?
Well, I think we're in the West often quite keen to paint every move of Russia's at this stage after the Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv, now the loss of Kherson, as an act of desperation. I'm not sure that President Putin sees it that way, and I'm not sure that the Russian people see it that way. They have consistently been depicted, or this conflict for them has been depicted in any case as one against NATO, where NATO is supplying weapons to Ukraine, where NATO is controlling Ukraine like a puppet master, and where NATO's ultimate goal is to destroy Russia. So I don't think that many people in Russia would see this, and it is for the moment a limited strike if it was deliberate, as a significant escalation. But of course, President Putin and his close advisors around him know the repercussions of a strike on NATO territory. You know, is this them testing the waters for quite how far NATO is prepared to go? Is this President Putin saying, don't make a fool of me on the world stage, don't embarrass me so that I can't actually attend the G20? Because it's pretty clear that the reason he's not there is because he knows that he would be ostracized. This has happened to Sergei Lavrov, his foreign minister, on the ground there. He knows that he would have got significant repercussions at the G20 that would have been very awkward. And that is why we've seen this huge wave of missile strikes across Ukraine again today. I think it is a response. Whether this latest hit on Polish territory as part of that still remains to be seen.
Diana, with the view there from Russia, thank you very much indeed. Well, the Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki called an urgent meeting of a government committee for national security. Just getting lines now from the government spokesman Peter Muller now. He says that they are raising the readiness of their military units. Also that there was an explosion and it did indeed kill 2 Polish citizens. And Mr. Muller going on to say that we will not answer any more questions, but they are verifying if they need to activate NATO Article 4, which is a consultation between NATO members. You remember NATO Article 5 is the one for all for one enactment of an attack on one is an attack on all. Which is the backbone of NATO. This is verifying if they need to activate NATO Article 4. This is after a National Security Council meeting in Poland itself. So let's get the latest from Siobhan Robbins, who's been monitoring the situation now from Berlin, and certainly the European reaction from the States, NATO members everywhere, showing how seriously this is being taken, Siobhan.
Yes, and I think that cautious language that you've just reported coming from the Polish government really underlines what a tense situation we are now facing. They have confirmed that there's been an explosion. What they haven't confirmed from those lines that you're reporting is what's caused that explosion. Is it indeed a Russian missile or missiles, as is being reported? To bring people up to date of what we have heard in terms of reports is that missiles or Russian missile has hit a grain store in a village on the Polish-Ukrainian border. Reports that 2 people have died, that firefighters are at the scene. We know the Polish held this emergency meeting where we're just getting updates now. They're looking at whether they trigger Article 4 to have more discussions with their NATO counterparts. We've had some statements coming out of some of those counterparts. So NATO, for example, saying we're looking into these reports closely and closely coordinating with our ally Poland. President Zelensky of Ukraine saying we have long warned that Russian actions are not limited to Ukraine. The Russians denying this, saying that the reports of Russian missiles striking Poland are deliberate provocation to escalate the situation. Estonia calling this most alarming. The French President Emmanuel Macron asking for further verification work to be done to try and find out more about these explosions. And the Czech Republic saying if Poland confirms that the missiles also hit its territory, this will be a further escalation by Russia. We stand firmly behind our EU and NATO ally. And I think, you know, we've said it time and again, but that really is the key now. Was this a deliberate attack? If so, what does NATO do now? And it's very, very clear that cautious language that we're hearing coming from the Polish government, that they are having lots of behind the scenes chats to find out what the next action of them should be.
Absolutely, holding an extraordinary meeting of the National Security Bureau in Poland, and a confirmation, as Siobhan said there, from the French Defence Ministry that President Macron has asked people to carry out the necessary verification work after those explosions, what they called a removal of doubt policy. So let's get the latest then from our Defence and Security editor, Deborah Haynes. Everybody working behind the scenes to verify what happened here, Deborah.
Yes, it's vital that they have a clear picture as to what happened, because that will dictate and determine the response. Everybody will be very, very much aware that if this was a deliberate strike by Russia on NATO soil, then that has, from the very beginning of Russia's decision to launch its war in Ukraine, which is not a member state, that has been a red line, a clear red line by all NATO allies, that should Russia put one toe, one boot, one missile on NATO soil, then that would require an Article 5, a NATO response of some sort. Now, the thing that they will also be mindful of is that, given that is such a serious move, such a direct attack, a direct confrontation between the two sides, that they would have to be absolutely certain that that is indeed what happened. And like we're seeing now, the situation is confused. It's going to be key what Poland comes out and says. It's their country. They will have the best understanding as to what's happened. Of course, the US will have a clear picture too, given that satellites are focused down across the country in Ukraine, looking at every single bit of explosion and blast that goes on in that country and in the surrounding areas. So there will be a clear picture of what happened. And then it will be the intent. Was it an accident? Was it, as Diana said, potentially Ukrainian air defense system knocking Russian missiles out the sky and it landing in Polish territory? I think it's interesting, this talk about possibly Article 4 consultations taking place. That is all about NATO members under the treaty that all NATO members sign up to. They can have these an Article 4 consultation, which is when a member state thinks that the integrity of their territory is under threat, then they will have political consultations. It's not a military step, which is Article 5. But with these things, they do require consensus. So for Article 5 to be enacted, which is an attack on one being an attack on all, the only time it's ever been enacted was in the wake of the September the 11th attacks back in 2001 on the United States. It requires consensus. It requires all 30 member states to agree on the analysis and to agree that there is this collective threat, and then to respond. And so that is why you are going to see very slowly, not slowly, but very careful consideration being taken, because the next step could be so serious. But one other point to make is this Russian response tonight, coming out and denying that this explosion had anything to do with Russian missiles. Denials in the past have not been credible, but also saying that many times have not been credible, I should say, but also saying that this is a provocation, accusing Russia of this explosion. But in whose interest is it for NATO to create this provocation? Of course, there are those that would like NATO to be more active, or NATO allies to be more active in terms of defending Ukraine. But it seems a bit of a stretch for this kind of act to be a deliberate provocation on the NATO side. And so it's important as well to look at the way that Russia is responding to this, to see whether those denials are credible. And at the moment, it doesn't sound particularly credible.
Yes, it sounds fascinating that September the 11th was the time that Article 5 was invoked, because certainly the editor of Russia Today, in response to these blasts on Polish soil, had earlier tweeted, Deborah, good evening, 1962, referring there to the era of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But just hearing also from NATO's Jens Stoltenberg, NATO is monitoring the situation in Poland, and allies are closely consulting. You bet they are. Nobody wants to make the wrong decision here.
It's a incredibly serious. This is the worst. It's not quite the worst nightmare, but it's a nightmare that all NATO allies have been thinking about ever since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine, remember, crucially, is not a member state, so it does not enjoy the protections of collective defence, collective deterrence that is fundamental to those countries like the UK, like Poland, that are a member of the NATO alliance. But because many of those countries border Ukraine, as soon as Russia started conducting full-scale military attacks on Ukraine, there was, of course, the fear, especially when NATO allies individually started providing weapons to help the Ukrainians, that there could be some escalation, either deliberate or by mistake. And right now, even if this is a mistake, some kind of accidental strike that's hit Polish territory, there is then going to be the risk of a misunderstanding. It's a moment of maximum risk right now. And that's why cool heads and clear information are going to be crucial before anyone is going to want to make the next step.
Deborah, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Further word from the White House National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who has said that he has spoken with his Polish counterpart after those missile reports. That's according to a statement from the White House. Let's join now the retired General Sir Richard Barrons, former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command. How seriously should this be taken then? You obviously heard from our security and defence editor there.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with Deborah Haynes that right now is the time for cool heads and the facts, and the facts will be established probably in daylight when the parts of whatever caused this explosion, such as bits of a missile, will be located, and they're relatively easy to identify, and the radar tracks through the sky at the time of the explosion can also be investigated, because the stakes are really high. That if, and it would be extraordinary, Russia had decided to fire a missile into NATO territory, and we should recognize that it's probably unlikely Russia would choose to target a random grain silo in a village with a population of just 400 to start a war with NATO. But if Russia has decided to do that, then then this world of ours is taking a turn that no one could possibly have imagined even a month ago. Far more likely is an explanation that a missile has gone rogue, in other words, it's malfunctioned, or it's been deflected and ended up in Poland with tragic consequences. So exactly as your correspondent has described, you need to know what happened, what the intent was behind it, and then people should take a view on it. And I think a sort of international junior school football match whirring up the rhetoric around this right now is deeply unhelpful.
Yes, and I guess there are actually four possible explanations if indeed this was related to the Ukraine war. One, as you said, it was deliberate but unlikely. Another is a missile overshoot or gone wrong. The other is that air defence systems had been deployed and this was a remnant part of a missile, or indeed part of the interceptor itself. We know that Ukraine received NASAMS from America. They've got their own S-300s, Ukraine's existing Soviet-era air defence systems. So there are a number of explanations for this. So what does happen now, and how closely will NATO allies consult, do you think? Because this process of verifying what happened is already underway as far as we understand it.
So all eyes will now be on the site of the explosion, and people, experts in the technology, will be looking for missile debris and other debris to identify what it was that has killed these two poor souls this evening. And then when they've identified what it was, they can then start to investigate how it got there and maybe what the motive was behind it. And really only when that is clearer and clear, in my view, should the North Atlantic Council and NATO members take a definitive position on this, because to do so beforehand would imply they were prepared to decide on something really significant in the absence of actually knowing the facts. And the other point about this evening is there's this huge attention on this explosion in Poland for very, very good reasons. But the fact is, during the course of today, Russia has fired at least 90 missiles, cruise and ballistic missiles, into Ukraine. That's about $500 million worth of missiles. It's done a lot of damage, not to the military of Ukraine, but to the domestic electricity infrastructure, and that in itself must be clearly a more shocking event than one explosion in a field in Poland.
Well, absolutely. Let's talk about that and the energy crisis now in Ukraine and indeed in its neighbours. Moldova reporting power outages. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban convening a meeting of his Defence Council after crude shipments on a pipeline were suspended. The whole of the Kharkiv region, we're told, is without power, 80% of Lviv, and so on. You know, what is the strategy from Russia in order to damage that crucial infrastructure as we head into winter in Ukraine?
So there appear to be three parts to the Russian strategy right now. One is to do better on the battlefield, and the withdrawal from Kherson earlier this week made military sense, but was a huge strategic and indeed military setback. So there's a war on the battlefield for territory, and it's frankly not moving very much right now either way. There's a second aspect to the war in Ukraine, which is the war against the will of the Ukrainian people to continue in this fight, and Russia is trying to do that by depriving them of heat and light and energy to go to work and go to school. And then there's a third dimension, which is to try to deplete the will of Western nations, including the UK, to support Ukraine by targeting our cost of living and our energy supplies, and all of this can be connected in a campaign by Russia to continue to fight this war, frankly, with all the means at its disposal, military and non-military, short of weapons of mass destruction, at least so far.
General Schutz-Barons, great to have your thoughts there. Thank you very much indeed. And clearly a very serious situation. Various explanations underway. Certainly some people already analysing the parts, in fact, on Poland. Unverified, I have to say, suggesting it could be part of an S-300 AD system, a Ukrainian one. So we watch and wait. The verification process being called for by people like the French President, Emmanuel Macron, is underway. And the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg saying that he has spoken with the Polish President, Andrzej Duda, about the explosion in the east of the country and offered my condolences, he said, for the loss of life. NATO is monitoring the situation and allies are closely consulting. Important that all facts are established, and that has certainly been the watchword we've heard from the White House, from the State Department, and from those European nations who are already reacting to it. So far, the Polish government spokesperson, after that emergency meeting of the National Security Bureau of Poland, said that they confirmed there was an explosion which killed 2 Polish citizens. He went on to say, we are raising the readiness of military units, and Peter Müller saying that they are verifying if we need to activate NATO Article 4, a consultation process, and finally confirming that they will not answer any more questions at this time. So a degree of hesitation, certainly, about drawing any conclusions. Well, let's talk now to Mark Voiga, former Special Advisor for Russian and Eurasian Affairs to the Commanding General of US Army Europe, and certainly caution and verification, the watchwords of tonight so far.
Absolutely, and yet we must not forget that we are now caught in an escalatory game with the Russian leadership, and the Russian leadership respects first and foremost strength. So yes, our response must be measured, but it also must be strong and decisive. The technicalities, of course, will be established apparently tomorrow or in the coming days, but regardless of what caused this accident, should we leave it unanswered in any shape, form, or fashion, this will give a very strong signal to the Russians, the Russian leadership, to Putin himself, that NATO and the collective West is indecisive, and that we are, wavering in defending our territory. I understand that this is viewed as a minor accident. It's although for the first time in decades, NATO citizens of a NATO state have been killed, quite unfortunately, and the world has never been closer to war since I would say the Cuban Missile Crisis in October '62. Still, even challenging a limited area within NATO could be part of the Russian hybrid game, and even the one of the former top UK commanders in 2014 was actually quite concerned about potential challenges by Russia of such distant pieces of territory within NATO. This could be a probing action, and therefore a decisive response. So it could be a military if we were able to prove that this was a deliberate attack. It could be political, it could be economic, but at any rate, this should not be left without any response on the part of the West.
And certainly you see the reaction from those European nations who border Russia, a great deal of concern for many of them. The Latvian defence minister, for example, saying NATO could provide air defences to Poland and part of the territory of Ukraine. You know, is more needed, do you think, to bolster NATO defence, whatever the cause of this?
Absolutely, not only air defenses, but Poland absolutely needs missile defenses, American Patriot missiles. This is a whole another ball game. This is what we call hitting a bullet with a bullet. It's a completely different technological level. And I might add a missile defense if strategically located along the borders or within range from Western Ukraine. Could, at the behest of the Ukrainian government, potentially also provide some sort of cover for Lviv, for critical areas in Western Ukraine itself, thus creating a sort of a missile shield. Therefore, now is the time, regardless of the type of response we're gonna get and what this will elicit. Now is the time for both Poland, for the eastern flank or Eastern Front states, and for Ukraine to demand more from the NATO leadership, from the US and other allies to actually protect their airspace, and so that the Russians don't enter this escalation cycle even more forcefully and continue challenging NATO's sovereignty on NATO territory already.
And just quickly, if you don't mind, we had a 10-point peace plan from President Zelensky presented to what he called the G19, pointedly ignoring Russia as part of the G20 today. And yet you talk about an escalatory conflict with Russia. Does that include, in your view, the energy war, which seems to have impacted tonight Moldova and indeed Hungary?
Absolutely, and the energy weapon is one of the tools of this notorious Russian hybrid warfare. This is what allows Russia to impact Europe's politics, populations, the economy, to put pressure on Europe, short of triggering a shooting war, and therefore, the energy threat is as real as the military threat. And again, it must get the proper response from the United Europe as a front, as a group of democratic nations, and not on a piecemeal fashion.
Mark Voigas, former special advisor for Russian and Eurasian affairs to the commanding general of US Army Europe. Very good to have your thoughts. Thank you very much indeed. So lots of reaction from NATO nations to an incident on the Polish border with Ukraine. Poland confirming tonight that there was an explosion and 2 Polish citizens have been killed. We'll have more after this.
Success depends on having the right support. At Aramco, that means answering the right questions. How can we inspire the champions of tomorrow? We're doing it by empowering women in the energy industry and on the golf course, supporting their talents so they can pave the way for others to follow. Aramco, powered by How.
So the very latest then on the situation on the border of Ukraine and Poland. We're just hearing from the White House that President Biden has now been briefed on the reports out of Poland and will speak to the Polish president shortly. The very latest then from the White House. Verification underway about what happened. There has been an emergency meeting of Poland's National Security Bureau, and its spokesperson, Piotr Muller, has come out and said there was an explosion and 2 Polish citizens have been killed. They are increasing their readiness of military units and considering whether Article 4, consultation with other NATO members has to be invoked. But certainly a great deal of reaction from NATO and EU members after what was suggested that Russian missiles had fallen and killed 2 people at a grain drying store on the Polish border. As you can see, the Russian Ministry of Defense has said via its Telegram account, the statements of the Polish media and officials about the alleged fall of Russian missiles is a deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation. No strikes on targets near the Ukrainian-Polish state border were made by Russian means of destruction. The wreckage published in hot pursuit by the Polish media from the scene has nothing to do with Russian weapons, the view there. But as I said, lots of reaction and verification from the scene and consultation now underway. Just hearing the very latest, in fact, from the French president, that a G20 meeting will be an important moment to draw attention to the situation in Ukraine, and certainly how many world leaders have now been woken up. In fact, just reading, President Macron of France has now been in contact with the Polish authorities after those blasts on the border. And the head of Poland's National Security Bureau says Polish President Duda is talking to the US President Joe Biden right now. So that is the very latest. As I said, consultation is underway and we'll certainly keep abreast of the very latest. But let's head to the G20, shall we now? Rishi Sunak refusing to apologise for the economic turmoil caused by Liz Truss's government. Mr Sunak said mistakes had been made by his predecessor but did not say sorry for the economic plans that caused the market instability. His Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is preparing to deliver the autumn statement outlining their fiscal plans this Thursday. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports now from Bali.
New to the job and new to this world stage, the Prime Minister meeting friendly leaders at the opening of the G20 summit in Indonesia. But for all the brief moments of levity, heavy issues around this table. Russia's continued war in Ukraine weighing on the world. Rishi Sunak glaring at Russia's foreign minister from across the room. Moscow's war with Ukraine hurting the global economy, making his job harder. But so did his predecessor.
Liz Truss
blew an enormous £30 billion black hole in the public finances. This is, I think, like the modern Tory party's Black Wednesday. If you want to move on for this, don't you need to start by saying sorry to the British people about what's just passed?
On the steps of Downing Street, when I first became Prime Minister,
mistakes were made.
I said mistakes were made, and I said part of the reason
one's
that I became Prime Minister was to fix them.
No one's apologised. The Prime Minister refusing 6 times to say sorry for the economic turmoil caused by the party he leads. No one apologised. People can't pay their mortgages, potentially. People are struggling with food bills. No one has taken responsibility. Will you now say to the British people, let them say, I'm sorry they messed up, I'm going to try and fix it?
We've actually seen all those UK-specific factors in terms of how much we borrow, what's happened to the pound. Those have all considerably improved. And what we're now facing are the same challenges that many of the countries here are facing as well.
Russia one challenge, and the PM seeking out countries that don't see eye to eye.
And indeed tackle some of these global challenges.
Such as Saudi Arabia and China, a big focus too. This a PM who has talked tough, but now wants to engage. Do you think you can have a collaborative relationship with President Xi?
I think it's an indisputable fact of the global economy that China is a big part of it. And if we want to solve big global challenges like public health, like Russia and Ukraine, fixing the global economy, or indeed climate change, it's important to have a dialogue and to engage with China as part of solving those challenges.
You said to me last night you were hopeful you'd be the first Prime Minister to meet President Xi for a few years for any British Prime Minister. Are you going to meet him?
I'm hopeful that I can. I mean, this, as I said, I think it's important that we engage with people to try and tackle some of these shared challenges, and I'm here to talk to people, and that's what I hope is possible.
Tonight, a relaxed Rishi Sunak making it all look possible at a G20 welcome dinner. But for all these leaders meeting in the shadow of war, these are challenging times, especially for an unproven Prime Minister about to deliver us all bad news. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Bali in Indonesia.
Yes, not sure they will be so relaxed now. Many leaders are being and have been woken up, certainly. The EU's Council President, Charles Michel, is suggesting a coordination meeting on Wednesday with EU leaders attending at the G20 in Bali after those explosions in Poland. So a meeting of those leaders who are connected to NATO, no doubt. And the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has also tweeted saying she is alarmed by the reports of an explosion in Poland. We are closely monitoring the situation and are in touch with Polish authorities and partners and allies. I extend my condolences and my strongest message of support and solidarity with Poland and our Ukrainian friends. And of course, the day started with President Zelensky of Ukraine addressing the G20. He pointedly called it the G19. Clearly, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was in attendance, suggesting a 10-point peace plan and saying that Russia would be judged by its actions if it wanted peace. Well, soon after 100 missiles around that descended on those main cities in Ukraine, including the capital Kyiv and Lviv as well in the west. The result is blackouts in many areas. The Kharkiv region, it is reported by authorities there that power is out. Issues with power also in Moldova, in Hungary, a pipeline. It seems gas pipeline has been affected, and the Hungarian leader also calling an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. So the energy war very much at the forefront, quite aside from this incident of explosions on the Polish side of the border, and Poland clearly a NATO member. Back with more news in just a moment.
When I was at school, I used to get bullied a lot. They said some things like, it's not your fault that you were born like this, it's your mother's fault, and some very rough comments like that, like this one. So I used to get home from school, close myself into my room, and just build stuff with Lego bricks, and that's how it went on for like, I don't know, maybe 10 years. And when I was 9, I decided that maybe I could build a prosthetic. So I used the lower part of the boat, the hull, I think it's called, and I placed it below my arm. So I covered it. I built a grapple on the edge, and then I was able to move the prosthetic with this little movement that I have on my right arm. After that, years went on, and when I was 15, I bought this helicopter from Lego, which I was very excited to build. But then I realized when I was 17 that I could actually use the bricks for build something else. So I was repeating my school year. I was having a lot of free time, and then I decided to build something different. So again, I just tied some bricks around my right arm, right here, with some sweater cords that you use to pull the hoodie closer, so the bricks wouldn't fall off.
Or
And
it could be, I don't know, hole cruncher.
and then
You know.
When I finished, I couldn't believe that I had a prosthetic on with Legos. The one that I built when I was 9 was very small. It was something like this, actually. This is a prototype that I built recently. So it's a short prosthetic that uses my right arm to grab objects, and as you can see, it can work with my movement right here. I pull the cord and the grapple's closed. This one's actually broken, I have to fix it, but I don't have the materials here, so yeah. Just for you to see, I can put it on, and this thing moves up and down when I push a little button on the prosthetic right here. I can do this with my arm, and then I push this button, and the prosthetic goes up and down, and the hand closes and opens at the same time.
We'll return to news of Poland in a moment, but in the meantime, the England and Wales football teams have arrived in Qatar for the World Cup, which kicks off this weekend. Both teams will play their opening games on Monday. Wales take on the USA, while England play Iran. Criticism of Iran continues to grow. There have been protests for many weeks now against the Iranian regime in reaction to the death in police custody of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports now from Qatar on a tournament becoming increasingly political.
Leaving the rain of England for the desert heat. Checking into their Qatar hotel. For a World Cup with Wales for the first time in 64 years. And a first World Cup in the Middle East where political and human rights issues are not just facing the host nation.
Iran's players are building up for their World Cup opener against England, with calls for the team to be thrown out of the tournament over the country's supply of arms for Russia in the war in Ukraine and the repression of women's rights back home.
Some Iranian players have shown solidarity with protests against the regime that erupted in September. A situation manager Carlos Queiroz is grappling with on the eve of the tournament.
Will the Iranian players at this World Cup be allowed to protest against the Iranian regime?
Everybody have the right to express themselves. You guys are used to bend your knees in the games. Some people agree, some people don't agree with that. And in Iran, it is exactly the same.
Are you okay representing a country, Iran, at this World Cup that represses the rights of women?
How much you pay me to answer to that question? You are a private company, how much you pay me? Talk with your boss, and at the end of the World Cup, I can give you the answer if you make me a good offer.
You say it's an honour, but are you honoured?
No, I'm saying to answer to that question, don't to answer to that question. Okay?
Thinking we have 20 minutes now. Training open, please.
It will be hard for Iran to insulate themselves from the politics and activism of this tournament. The Americans, who play their first game against Wales, are speaking out against discrimination and worker abuses in Qatar. Another team wanting to make a positive and lasting impact. Soon, football will be played after a 12-year build-up shrouded in controversy. But this most politically charged of World Cups will struggle to escape the politics. Rob Harris, Sky News, Doha.
Let's take a look at the weather now.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather is sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it is cooler this week, windy with widespread showers or longer spells of rain. Wednesday will start mostly fine, if chilly in places. There'll be a scattering of showers, mainly in the south and the west. More general rain and severe gales will affect Shetland. So staying wet and windy there through the morning, while southern England will see more heavy showers, especially the southeast. Most other places look dull or dry rather, with some sunshine, but western coast will have a few showers too, and cooler than today.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Let's get the very latest lines as we show the pictures from the scene of explosions on the Polish border with Ukraine. The very latest we've heard from the Poles is that they're increasing the military readiness of specific units. Warsaw checking whether NATO Article 4 needs to be activated. In the meantime, the EU Council President Charles Michel is proposing a coordination meeting on Wednesday with EU leaders who are attending the G20 summit in Bali. And certainly a number of world leaders we know have been woken up from there, including the US President Joe Biden has been briefed, we are told, and has spoken to the Polish President Andrzej Duda about the situation. France as well, Macron has been speaking, suggesting that the meeting at the G20 will help focus the minds on the situation in Ukraine. And certainly after President Zelensky addressed via video link those leaders there was a wave of missile strikes by Russia, around 100 hitting Kyiv, hitting Kharkiv, hitting Lviv, with enormous power outages, the region of Kharkiv in blackout, we are told. Moldova, neighbouring Moldova, also affected. So very serious repercussions in terms of the infrastructure targeting of those Russian missile strikes. In the meantime, what caused the explosions on the Polish border? Was it a deliberate targeting by a Russian missile? Was it an overshoot of a Russian missile? Was it a missile that had been intercepted by an air defence system and a remnant fell over the border? Or was it part of the interceptor itself, like the air defence systems that the Ukrainians have or those that have been provided for them? The scenes, as you can see, the emergency services arriving there tonight, but a verification process is underway right now amongst NATO members. Ukraine is not a NATO member, but Poland is, of course. And Article 5 suggesting that an attack on one is an attack on all means this is a very serious situation. The editor of Russia Today said in a tweet after the incident, "Good evening, 1962," relating to the Cuban Missile Crisis. But so far, Russia has denied that it fired any missiles in the area of the settlement and said any suggestion that it did was a deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation. We'll have live news from our correspondents across Europe and America
blasphemous and prematurable, or maybe the reality feed. No one really knows. Listen to all of these. A peaceful envy in you. You just betray the butterfly. Nobody makes sense. Dude, for the best scene of anyone.
Tracy, get breakfast. Can you do something nice?
She was tortured.
I have no idea. I really don't know what she wants. I don't know crazy something. You should listen for babies communicate. Babies want their parents to do something for them. They cry out. Babies also know that their parents will afraid of when they cry. But they cleverly use that act as terrible sometimes. Parents need to stop their actions so that I can say no. Tracy, stop. Tracy, you don't stop crying. You're so good. You put yourself on your person keeps my shit. Babies.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The apparent Russian missiles which have killed 2 people inside Poland as NATO and America decide how to respond.
When it comes to our security commitments and Article 5, we've made it crystal clear that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
It followed a day of missile strikes against cities across Ukraine as Russia denies responsibility and calls it a deliberate provocation.
Yes, Paradigm wants us to find Midas and get his help.
For the whole hospital.
We see the impact of Russia's assault on Ukraine's power and utilities, with the babies born under fire. Also tonight, how does this happen in the UK today? The coroner's damning verdict over a 2-year-old boy killed because of mold in his flat. No apology for economic pain. The Prime Minister, as his government prepares to cut spending and raise taxes.
I've acknowledged from the steps of Downing Street in the first statement that I made to the country an acknowledgement that the mistakes I made. If you don't want to apologise, what I want to do now is fix them.
Also this evening, England touching down for a World Cup full of promise, but also political controversy.
Oh god, it's beating this consequences. So now this is going to be, I'm actually going to try this out. Alright, does it? Oh, Yeah, let's speed this up a
Hello,
little
good
bit.
evening. NATO is facing its biggest
It's not gonna
decision
tip me
of
over,
the
is it?
Ukraine
Stop,
war
you're
tonight after what
crushing
appeared to
me.
be Russian missiles at a village in
The
Poland, killing
Phoenix!
2 people.
Whoa! Whoa, that
Russia's
girl just
defense
died!
ministry
How she
denied it
died?
was
What happened to her
responsible
leg?
and said the reports
What
were a
the
deliberate
thieves got?
provocation. But Poland's government is holding an urgent
You don't
national
deserve to
security
live
meeting,
anymore.
and the country's allies are deciding
Killing you.
how to respond.
Oh gosh.
In a moment, we'll have the latest
Alright,
live from
she's out of
Washington
my head.
and Moscow.
It
But
took
first,
so
our
long,
Europe
I'm actually mad at
correspondent
that.
Adam Parsons has this report.
Smoke rising over a Polish village after a blast that will be heard round the world, allegedly caused by Russian missiles. Landing not in Ukraine, but here in Poland, a member of both NATO and the European Union. Emergency vehicles arriving at the scene, but this isn't about ambulances or police officers, it's about the inflammatory spectre of Russia attacking a NATO member.
We have a variety of methods at our disposal in terms of verifying information, to include contacting allies and partners to gather information.
Back to our ship.
Again, we're looking into these reports, and when we have more to provide, we'll be sure to do so.
Russia has denied any involvement, saying in a statement that it had launched no strikes in the area. It's described this as a deliberate provocation. In Poland, the government has called an emergency meeting to consider its response. The country has recently called for much tougher action against Russian aggression. Within NATO and across Europe, there are now calls for urgent investigation to confirm that this really was a Russian missile, to discover where it came from and whether it was deliberately fired into Poland. NATO could activate Article 5, a response to an attack, but it might be more likely to turn to Article 4, which demands consultation.
I think there is enough ground for triggering what is just below Article 5, which is Article 4, which is basically Poland asking all the NATO members to come to the NATO headquarters to consult each other, to assess the threat, and to take concrete action.
Both anger and tension are now extremely high. Clarity and calm heads will be crucial.
How do I drop off my package?
Adam Parsons, Sky News, Brussels.
Let's just do this now. Oh god, what is this? Oh Jesus.
In the last few minutes, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called the incident a significant escalation.
There we go.
Hitting missiles on NATO territory. This is a Russian missile attack on collective security. This is a very significant escalation. We must act. And I want to say now to all our Polish brothers and sisters, Ukraine will always support you. Terror will not break free. Victory is possible when there is no fear. You and I don't have it.
How much? They're just falling from the sky. Stop.
Let's go now to our correspondents. Our US correspondent James Matthews is in Washington. Diana Mackey is in Moscow, and our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes is here in the UK. James, we've had reaction already from the US. We know that Joe Biden has been awoken and has been briefed and has already spoken to the Polish government.
Another box.
That's right, and an early morning wake-up call for President Biden. He was briefed on matters and then had that phone call within the past few minutes with the Polish President Andrzej Duda. We've had various statements from across the administration, the US administration, signifying not very much in terms of next steps.
Not on purpose, but it's just the nature of traffic. It's going to happen. This kind of a huge stage. Unless I hit this alien in front of me. I was like, whoa!
It's a challenge for NATO. There's no doubt about this, particularly for President Biden. Remember, this is a man who invoked the spectre of Armageddon as a potential consequence of this conflict. He has spoken repeatedly about standing foursquare behind Ukraine and NATO allies throughout the 8 months of conflict. He is a man who has talked the talk.
Oh no! All the husbands and kids died. Right, my turn to go. Right. Did I have to follow those laws? Dude, yeah, it's a red light. Oh, they stopped.
Whether this was intentional or an accident, an act of aggression
I like that. That's not so bad.
incompetence. The challenge for NATO is to protect one of its partners, to preserve the authority of NATO as a collective body, and also to send a message to Russia without unnecessarily escalating this conflict.
Please guide me the right way.
Well, Diana, Moscow, certainly fulsome denials from the Russians this evening, calling it a deliberate provocation.
I can't believe that happened to me.
Yes,
My
I mean, I
translator
think
on me.
that
Yeah, I
all
was gonna say,
parties at the moment
Stephen.
tend to call everything from the
I
other
got
side an
nothing.
escalation
I
and a
required
deliberate
nothing.
provocation. So if we
Nothing
strip
from
that
that
away,
trip.
what the Russian Ministry of Defence
Get
has
ready.
said in its statement today is, we
Oh
never struck any targets near the Polish-Ukrainian area, and the pictures that you see on Polish mass media are not Russian firepower. I think that once the night time is over, and it is possible to get forensic weapons experts who are, I'm sure, on the scene right now to ascertain exactly what weapon remnants they're seeing, everything will become more clear. Because there are various possibilities, as James was suggesting. It could have been a deliberate Russian missile attack, and therefore an escalation on the part of Russia to strike a non-strategic target, but on NATO's territory. It could have been a mistake, a Russian missile misfiring. It could have been, and this is the theory that is more pervasive on the Russian telegram channels, that this was shot a Russian missile aiming for a target in Ukraine. And let's not forget that there were strikes across the entirety of Ukraine today, the biggest wave of strikes Ukrainian officials say since the start of this war. It was taken down by Ukrainian air defense, and the remnants that hit that village in Poland may either be the remnants of the air missile defense system or of the original Russian missile. So there is a whole range of options, and I think the important thing is that NATO studies this with a very clear, cool head as to determine quite how to respond.
Stealing your package.
Okay, certainly concern expressed across NATO and Europe. Many explanations, as we heard there from Diana. Now under investigation, of course, but how serious could this be?
This is very, very serious. The fact that you've now got the conflict in Ukraine spreading out beyond Ukraine's borders is the nightmare scenario that NATO allies had been dreading. And that's why they will be taking this incredibly carefully, but incredibly seriously. Ever since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, which is not a member state, there's been that risk that those countries, those NATO countries bordering Ukraine, could become sucked into the conflict. Russia and NATO have tried very hard to avoid direct confrontation. So that's why NATO allies will want to know for sure exactly what happened, what the intent was behind it before they make any action. But they will take action because Poland is currently having to deal with this explosion, and the key issue is going to be how they respond, and they will all need to agree on that response. But one key thing is that it will happen quickly.
James, Diana, and Deborah, thank you. Well, Russia's missile strikes both today and in recent weeks have relentlessly targeted Ukrainian infrastructure, including power. Tonight we have a report on the impact of that on some of the most vulnerable people in the newly liberated city of Kherson.
I see.
Sky News has been to one maternity hospital inside Kherson and spoken to staff there and
for one meal.
mothers
That's
who gave
crazy.
birth in
You need to make money and buy back my dad.
This
Seems
report
about
from
right.
our
This is my
international
mum here.
correspondent,
I see she's
Alex
crying.
Rossi.
So I have to go in the basement, I guess.
Irina Starogumova guides me through the
Making a
gloom
meme.
with torch in hand.
Yay!
in
I don't know how you
Kherson's
make
Central
money from
Hospital.
memes. Making me.
Every aspect
That's
of
what I
her
do with
work
these
has been
memes, so I just
impacted
send
by
them
the
out.
war, and the liberation of her city will not make things better overnight.
Лаборатория. В чем-то можем и
To the
отказывать
internet.
пациенту, к сожалению, но объемы такие же.
Speed.
Просто
Upgrade speed.
медикаменты, они с
Yes.
подконтрольной территории
Now
Украины
do
мы
more.
сейчас не
More
можем
memes.
получить.
They
Yay!
are short of everything
Making
here,
a dank
but
memes.
perhaps most of all, power.
It's the same.
Even though it's daylight, it's still very dark in here. There's only one
I don't
generator
make it fast.
for the whole hospital.
It's very, very
When they
slow.
retreated from the city, the Russians
Expand the
destroyed the
basement. I don't know if
infrastructure
this is going to
that
end well.
provides
I don't know if
basic
I'm actually going to get
services.
that back.
And
I'd like
it's
to.
those with the
I'd like to
greatest
see.
need
Guys, have you
that are
played this
suffering
before?
most.
This is sort of a game that I
As
don't
we
know why it
take it to the
exists,
maternity
but it
ward,
looks
we can hear the sound of
frustrated.
war. The staff never get
Oh,
used to
stuff,
this
come on.
trauma
We've got great
they
storage as
cannot
well.
escape.
Change the wallpaper. This is the other thing though.
Inside, the difficulties are acute.
Of course it does. For the next one. We need faster English speed. There we go. It's faster now. Faster means we make more money faster.
Alyona has just gone into labour, and keeping her warm is the priority for the medics. It's improvised, but it works.
Instant upload! Make it rain money, depending on how I'm feeling. That's how much it costs. Like collector, if we're making more money, so we're going to do this a bit more AI. How to make this faster? Who needs sleep? Just drink an energy drink. So it means I don't have to go to sleep now? I have no clue what's going on, other than me making memes and sharing them. How do we get workers to make memes? That sounds like a better way of doing it. I also have we're going to make some money.
Yulia's son
This on
Constantine
here,
came into the
make more
world
money
on
per episode.
Liberation
That sounds good
Day.
as well. Still want it fast though.
The
It's
nurse
still
helps to
slow.
keep them warm
It's
using
still super,
bottles of
super
hot
slow.
water.
Do 10 now, 10 uploads. They want us to take ages. I think it's a bit spooky me being down in the basement for all these stupid things. All the money. Is it
The babies here were all conceived just before the start of
Twitter. By
this
the way,
war,
if you don't follow me on
and
Twitter,
for nearly all
go
of their
follow me.
pregnancies,
I do watch
the
people,
mothers
they
were living
talk to
under
me on
Russian
there.
occupation.
There we go, so we should make a lot more money.
Можно сказать, это вообще
So
ребенок
much
войны
better. You can
хотела
hire
до конца
friends.
отца,
This is what I'm
как
talking
захватить
about.
Херсон.
See, I told you
И
you can hire
оттуда, когда
people.
освободили,
It's going to be a
тоже
big
папа
like back in the day.
по
My
телефону, не
comment,
знаю, узнал ты,
making
не
it
узнал, что
faster,
сын
but it
родился.
hasn't. What's going on?
This war has been grinding on now for 9 long
I've got a friend doing
months,
it now.
but the mothers here hope their
Oh
children
my
will
god,
grow
you
up
have to him to
knowing only
make
freedom.
him work. It's
Alex
so
Rosson,
hard.
Sky News, Kherson.
So hard. I don't
The
think I'm
height of
paying them
Russia's
to do
war on
anything.
Ukraine
He's
on
just
some
sitting
of its
there
most
enjoying
vulnerable
it. This is
citizens.
mad. This is
How does it happen in the
making
modern
them
day
look for me for
UK?
the
A
life.
question
I'm like,
posed
actually,
by a
it's like,
coroner,
at
but no
least
doubt many others too, after the death of a 2-year-old
That's
boy
Hello?
exposed to extensive
Passing out
mould in
on
his
these as
family's
well.
flat.
You what?
Ishak
Yeah,
died in
I was
Rochdale 2 years ago.
downstairs.
Inzamam Rashid reports.
Why?
I was
This was a boy
talking to my
let
dad
down, neglected, and
about
failed by a system
We're
that was
going to
supposed to
okay.
protect him. Awabishak just turned 2
So,
before he died in
what's going on
December
with Scottish?
2020 from a severe respiratory condition
What's going on with
caused
Scottish?
by this.
It's a waste of
Mould and damp
honest, isn't
engulfed
it?
the one-bedroom
Tomorrow
flat
tomorrow
where
there's
he lived with his
G20,
family.
or
In
as I
every
like to
room,
say,
the black fungus led to
G19,
Awab
because
having
Russia
severe
shouldn't
breathing
be included.
difficulties. But despite
It's
the
where like
family's repeated
20
complaints since 2017,
leaders
nothing was
of
done
the world
to protect him. Almost
come
2 years
together
on from his death,
and
and today a
discuss
coroner ruled action
problems
to
and
treat and
and,
prevent the mould wasn't taken.
and apparently
Outside the court,
Poland,
Awab's mum and dad
well,
had a
NATO
message for those
countries are
responsible.
going to hold like
We shouted
a
out as
meeting
loudly
tomorrow
as we
during
could,
it
but despite making all those
about
efforts, every night we would be
World
coming
War
back
III, I
to
can.
the same
World
problem.
War III, I can have
Stop
to talk.
discriminating,
World War III, I can
stop
have to
being
talk.
racist,
we
stop
don't
providing
know
unfair treatment to
because
people
the
coming from
building
abroad,
force is on
stop
the border.
housing people in homes you know are unfit for human habitation.
So,
But
in
it
the
was the
meeting,
coroner's
they
comments
can't do nothing in
which
the
will
meeting. They
echo
can't like
across
kill
the
anyone.
housing sector throughout the country.
In the meeting, they can't kill
How
anyone.
does this happen?
Basically.
How in the
What do you mean?
UK in 2020 does a 2-year-old child die due to
See
exposure
ya.
to mould?
Yeah.
Miss Kersley said. This issue is not simply a Rochdale problem, nor is damp
True.
and mould simply a social housing problem. It is a significant issue in private sector too. There is little doubt that the tragic death of Awabishak will and should be a defining moment for the housing sector. Issues of mould and damp are still a major problem on this estate. Inside some of the flats we've visited, living...
What's this? Russian. See, Russia said that they have not they haven't done it, but no one believes them. Absolutely no one. What was this? Oh, it was coming to the only C1, no, not C130, A10. It's a Talon. C130, or C30. Talon, yeah. So like Talons. Okay. This is another one of them. Oh my god. That's what I see there in the C17. Oh, to see what they're okay. They're Texans. Yeah, Texan. Talon. C-17. Yeah. Oh. That'd be another one. Oh, where are they, man? I generally cannot wait. C-17. Super Galaxy? Where's that came from? Ah, it's from space thing. Right, oh. I thought that was NATO. I thought you said NATO then. C-17. C on there. I need to get to sleep, man. What's this? No, C-17. Wait, F-35? 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 Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Wait, come on, you quick. Okay, so it's... Would it be on the radar? So it... LA. Shit. What's it going over? And... Oh, wait. It's... Copy. Paste. Wait, what? That should be... I got an F-35, that's mad. F-35, let's go. Wait, where's it came from? Oh my god, it's gone far. Okay. Was it that? Bone... Howell. Army stage. Oh, abandoned? Oh, shit. It's one of these, I'd say. Sportsman's World Airport. Where can it get from there? 35 lightning. Wow. What's this? Oh. This came from there. Honolulu. So, Hickam. Ooh. Stratotanker. Oh, that's Air Force One. Well, one of them. That's a Chinook. I believe that's a Merlin. That's one of the President one. Wait. Gosh, what the fuck? Texan. They keep having these. Don't know what they are. Where's it? Indonesian or Indonesia? Indonesia? I don't know. It's oh. Oh, okay, okay. So Australia's also here. Oh. Okay. Makes sense. Chinook. Oh. They had a UAV. Italian one. Oh, it's the closest to the.
success.
And that seems to be a feeling shared by his teammate, Bruno Fernandes, who gave him a visibly frosty greeting when they joined up for the World Cup, as Greg Milam reports.
Cristiano Ronaldo's a long way from Manchester right now, training with Portugal for the World Cup. But there is no escaping the uproar he's created. Look at this frosty exchange with his United and Portugal teammate, Bruno Fernandes. And the drip feed of discontent continues in a new clip alleging the club didn't believe him when he said his daughter was ill.
It's something that really hurt me because they doubt of my words, that I struggle, especially Bella and Gio. We had 1 week in hospital because the Bella have a big problem. And I didn't go to the pre-season because of that, because I didn't was allowed to left my family if something happened to do it the pre-season.
His picture still adorns Old Trafford, but claims of betrayal and disrespect could have legal implications. This former football club chairman and lawyer doesn't see Ronaldo being sacked, though.
Would Manchester United really want to rip up this contract, particularly with the World Cup ahead? You can be assured that Ronaldo is going to be, I would imagine, performing at his very best to try and push Portugal through to the later stage of the competition.